Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, September 7th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Noah Kulwin and Brendan James, hosts of the amazing Blowback podcast, on their latest season covering Afghanistan. And later in the show, we will be speaking to whistleblower, McKinsey whistleblower, Garrison Lovely, also a freelance journalist, about McKinsey. Meanwhile, UAW strike deadline is a week from today. And half of New York City school bus drivers could walk out on the job if a new contract is not reached. More bad poll numbers for Biden. CNN has nearly half of Americans preferring any Republican to Biden in 2024. Any Republican? His age is front and center in this. But don't worry, everyone. The Hunter Biden indictment over him lying about being sober on a gun application is coming this month. Just hang in there, everybody. Just hang in there. I know you're at the edge of your seat. McCarthy wants to tie more border funding to the new Ukraine package. Good climate news. Biden reverses a Trump-era plan to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, protecting 13 million acres of wilderness. On the bad side, the Willow drilling project nearby is still a go, on Biden's direction. And then in horrific climate news, 2023, officially the hottest Northern Hemisphere summer on record. Mexico's Supreme Court decriminalizes abortion nationwide. Alabama's trying to get the Supreme Court to take back its ruling, forcing them to draw a second black majority district. That's not how it works, buddies. 6 Colorado voters file a lawsuit to keep Trump off the ballot using the 14th Amendment insurrection clause. And lastly, FDA to greenlight new COVID boosters as soon as tomorrow. Everyone, get your boosters this fall. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. Yes, it is. And it's actually a two-hander. Matt is out today. So then in comes Bradley back from his time off, wearing a Jets jersey.
I'm back. Football is back.
Football is back. We have a mega, we'll just plug it now, mega ESPN episode today because
I'm tan.
Season opener tonight. You are tan. You are tan.
I'm ready to be back. I'm ready to be back for the fall.
One of my best friends, Zach, I called him tan once. He struggles to get a tan. And he said, God, there's nothing nicer you could have said to me. I feel like I'm 10 feet tall.
Yeah, no, being tan is the best thing. Especially,
I just thought that was so funny.
And even though I'm partially Middle Eastern, I burn really quickly.
Yeah, you're half Iranian.
That's my white.
Oh, you burn quickly.
I burn really
easily.
quickly. That's
wow.
That's my white father's doing.
So, did you wear sunblock?
Oh, aggressively.
Good. That's what we like to hear here, over here on the Majority Report. Preventative health care, everybody. I'm not so good at that sometimes. Sometimes I forget and get burned, but we'll put that aside for now. Someone writes in, Antonin Scalia's Ghost, you didn't mention Tucker's bombshell interview last night. Don't worry, in the fun half, we will be getting to the Obama gay sex scandal. The amount of discrediting information about this person making this claim is hilarious. So stay to the fun half for that. And we will discuss it. But as I mentioned at the start of the show, we are nearing a potentially enormous strike in a summer of incredibly important labor action. We've been discussing this on this program for a while. The UAW's contract with the big three automakers, Stellantis, aka Fiat Chrysler, Ford, and GM, expires at 11:59 p.m. A week from today, so the 14th of September, which is a Thursday. Shawn Fain, the leader of the UAW, has been refreshingly strong and militant in his support of the rank and file. Around 150,000 workers fall under this here. This is him on CNBC, where he's asked an interesting question, to say the least, about the UAW withholding its endorsement for President Biden so far. And the framing of this is peculiar by the interviewer, but great response by Shawn.
I'm going to wrap it up, and I hate to go into politics. It's an ugly world out there, Shawn, but it is relevant here. I want to ask you this. Yeah. You guys, I think, have withheld your endorsement so far for President Biden in a second term. Do you worry? He said, I'm super pro-union, President Biden. Do you worry? And does it go into your thinking that a strike could embarrass President Biden?
I don't think a strike would embarrass President Biden. I think a strike can reaffirm to him of where the working class people in this country stand. And it's time for politicians in this country to pick a side. Either you stand for a billionaire class where everybody else gets left behind, or you stand for the working class. The working class people vote. And as far as our endorsements go, as we've said, our endorsements are going to be earned, not freely given, and actions are going to dictate who we endorse. And I know the other candidate, wanted to come out the other day and talk about how our members are crazy for not backing him. But, there's two things I want to talk about with that person real quick, if I can have a moment. It's just, I'll never forget leading up to the 2016 election, that candidate talking about doing a rotation where they need to come to places like Michigan and the Midwest and send our jobs somewhere else where they pay less money and make us be begging for our jobs down the road. That's not something that works for working class people, and sure as hell not for UAW workers. And he was on the air the other day saying that encouraging people to stop paying union dues. So that's not someone that stands for a good standard of living.
So that's a perfect response, because he rejects the ridiculous framing, as if Shawn would be concerned about embarrassing Biden. Oh God, is Biden getting a little red in the face because 150,000 workers are striking for a livable wage? Oh no, what will the UAW president do? As if he's concerned with that in the slightest. But then he takes a shot at Trump there, and makes it quite clear that Trump is not a candidate they would consider supporting. The endorsement will come if Biden chooses to stand on the side of workers here, and it won't come if he doesn't choose to be vocal about this until after these negotiations and potential strike come to their conclusion and the workers get what they deserve. And that is just how leverage works. So if Biden wants their endorsement, Biden better do something about it, even though there was an article yesterday, I believe in the Post or the Washington Post or the Times, about how Biden doesn't want to weigh in. He doesn't feel it's his duty to do so. Well, you want the endorsement? Maybe weigh in. But putting the stupid political angle aside for just 1 second, because this is really about workers and the standard of living in this country. What Shawn and Fain and the UAW are asking for is pretty standard. The auto industry in this country is around 3% of the economic output. It is a infamously important industry. It got bailed out in 2008 based on its cachet in that way, and workers made massive sacrifices in that time period, because back when the crash happened, workers in the auto industry and the UAW did away with one of their most important protections in their agreement, which was COLA, cost of living adjustments, which is essentially how workers get their raises. COLA, the cost of living adjustment, had been a part of UAW contracts since the 70s. It was a hallmark of what made, the auto worker the quintessential American job for someone in this country to get ahead and have a middle-class life. Now it's the quintessential American job in the saddest way possible because their jobs are getting shipped overseas and workers are being forced to take second jobs to keep up with the cost of living because that COLA protection, cost of living adjustments, were done away with because the workers did the big three automakers a solid in their estimation, by saying, hey, the economy's falling apart. We'll make this sacrifice in order to keep our jobs, to keep things going. And they said, the bosses, hey, don't worry. Once this storm is over, we will we'll bring back COLA after we suspend it. And they still haven't. It is the year 2023. CEOs are getting massive bonuses at these big three automakers and still no COLA. So why would these workers who have been lied to over and over and over again since the crash, when they said, we'll bring the cost of living adjustment back, the most important thing to achieving wage gains as these contracts are constructed, we will bring it back, but they haven't done so, and they've broken this promise multiple times as they ship jobs to Mexico, as they threaten to do so in the press to prevent a strike. Why would Sean Fain and the UAW trust these automakers unless they agree to these demands? So I am thrilled to see a union president here back up their rank and file like this, and making and using their leverage in a way that I think is justified 100 times over, given how screwed over these workers have been by the automakers. So pay raises is part of what they're demanding. 32-hour work week, which is considered ambitious, but I think it's awesome that they're starting from that point. 32-hour work week with 40 hours of pay. They want traditional pensions for new hires, which I think is really great as well, because we know that the 401k model has been a failure to provide retirement for people in a way that is sustainable and robust. So there are a bunch of other demands, but long story short, solidarity with the UAW workers ahead of the deadline next week, and this is one of the most important stories of the year, and certainly of the next few weeks. All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by Noah Kulwin and Brendan James, hosts of the Blowback podcast. are back, and we are joined now by Noah Kulwin and Brendan James, hosts of the Blowback podcast, which I always call the excellent Blowback podcast. Many people are saying it's a show about U.S. empire, and this season is about Afghanistan. Noah is also a contributing editor at Jewish Currents, a writer for Defector, and Brendan is a writer, former producer for Chapo Trap House. Guys, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, listen to part of the first episode. I've listened to the 3 previous seasons before. Couldn't recommend it more highly. We actually I wanted to read this before we got started because someone wrote in anticipation, Professional Dumpster Fire. I started listening to Blowback because of the recommendation on the show, and holy cow, it's an amazing podcast. Great to listen to as I moved into my new place. And my dad has been asking about it and how we can listen to it on his phone. So, like, you know, potentially getting boomers on board the, like, maybe U.S. empire isn't the best thing train, which is always helpful. But yeah, let's start with the most devastating part of the first episode. That the title card from Rambo 3 that I've long believed says that the movie was dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters is a misnomer. Is that the case?
Unfortunately, yes, it is. That was the bombshell that we discovered early on, which set the tone for the rest of the season. It is someone just did a really ace's job in Photoshop, and it went viral. I don't know how many years ago, but yeah, there's no home video or like copy that has ever had that postscript. So, but as a friend of ours said, you don't need that movie to have a postscript that says this film is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen. It makes that very clear throughout the entire film, as did many Hollywood products at the time, which is a kind of an aspect of the season that we go into a bit.
Right. And I mean, I think that's why it rings so true, right? The sentiment is because there are, many people have a general understanding that the U.S. funded the Mujahideen in the past, and they may have even heard the term Operation Cyclone before. So, Noah, I'll ask you an overview. What was that? What happened during that period of history that, the CIA and the United States was pouring money into these groups in Afghanistan, and how did it start?
Sure. So in the 1970s, we began supporting and putting resources behind the people who would become in the future the Mujahideen. And in the late 1970s, within Afghanistan, not anything really that the Soviet Union was doing, a communist party in response to, sort of an ailing, despot who had been kind of like a developmentalist leader, they take over, and there's a great amount of intrigue, to put it mildly. But I do think that the sort of central point is that the U.S. was involved and we had an interest there before. But once the Afghan Communist Party took over, it was very unstable. And the Soviets, I'll let Brendan explain the nuances of what comes next there, because I think it perhaps matters a little bit more. But, well before we even get into sort of ramping up the aid, but we had sort of viewed Afghanistan in the 1970s as a potential Cold War battleground after it had been kind of in the background for the decades past. It hadn't mattered that much. But then Communist Party takes over, and, all sorts of opportunities present themselves in the chaotic year of 1979.
Yeah, I would say that we tend to make it a point of our show that the funding and the relationship between some pretty bad customers inside of Afghanistan had begun before the Communist Party there got to power and before the Soviet invasion, many years before. But it started to grow and grow as it became clear that it was more useful by the day. And so Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to Carter, was really the most sort of active organizer of a jihad against the Soviet Union. And by the time Reagan was in power, all the things were in place to just have this thing become what it became, which is the largest covert operation in CIA history. And some of our clients there were some of the highest paid CIA assets in history, and they were the types of guys who, long before Al Qaeda was on anyone's lips, were known for throwing acid in the face of women, and known for killing school teachers, be they communist or otherwise, known for essentially what we now think of and what that Rambo 3 spiritual truth is about, which is that they were the Contras of Central Asia, really. And so the first half of our season is really watching that supply chain grow. It's watching these guys get recruited. It's seeing who was pulling the strings in this project. And of course, looking at the Soviets who, while it was true that they barreled into Afghanistan knowing it was a mistake, they did try to go to the UN for peace negotiations from the get-go. Which was quite unlike the U.S. and Vietnam, a conflict this is always compared to. And so we also try to look at, there may be some lessons about what happens when a superpower is bleeding another one, and what happens when they try to stop peace negotiations from their desperate enemy, or just stop them altogether and tell their friends, don't sue for peace, keep this going, because that's very much what was happening at this time as well. So that's the first half of the season before we even get to the U.S. occupation. And
right.
Invasion.
Well, you mentioned Vietnam there, and I mean, either of you can take this, but how did the U.S. failure in Vietnam play a role domestically, politically, in the United States is just pouring money, which a lot of that obviously was behind the scenes, but into these extremist religious kind of rural groups in Afghanistan to combat the growing communist kind of parties and discussions and organizations happening largely, is my understanding, in the more urban areas of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so the Vietnam comparison is one that the American government and the people who carried out this operation made themselves, and sort of they viewed this as the kind of natural response. Like we had suffered a Vietnam, like this country that we bombed into oblivion halfway across the world. We were the victims there, of course, but and then after that war, there was, for a lot of the people who had suffered it, there was the desire to inflict something similar in the Soviet Union. And that's not to say that that's the reason all this happened or anything like that. Just that it's what, when you look at what these people are saying about why they're doing what they're doing, it's something that weighs very heavily on them. And, something that has only sort of occurred to me in like recent weeks is, that John Milius, who wrote Red Dawn, which is spiritually about Afghanistan. Like it's about what if we made the Americans the Mujahideen. And Milius is also the guy who wrote Apocalypse Now with, with Coppola. And I think that sort of is a nice, representation of how these kinds of ideas are linked about, we suffered this grievous, had this disarming, disorienting experience for the American. And now we're going to go do with that to the Soviet Union. Consequences be damned for the country of Afghanistan, which will become, as a result of this, a perpetual battleground for, 40 to 50 years.
And just one thing I think is important to note is how the two conflicts are very much not the same thing. I mean, obviously, in a basic sense, you have a superpower bogged down in a military quagmire. That I can understand why people would call that a Vietnam for the Soviet Union, but on the other hand, as I've sort of started to try and articulate when we explain the show or the season, is the Soviets and the Chinese did not invent Ho Chi Minh or the resistance to U.S. occupation in Vietnam. They were quite on their way without all that. Now, the Soviets and the Chinese did give billions, probably not as much as the U.S. ended up giving in Afghanistan, but they did support those resistance fighters. But in the case of Afghanistan, the U.S. cobbled together the worst criminals who happened to be the most brutal commanders, and tried to organize them into a coherent resistance front. And it didn't really work because they were always trying to kill each other. They were always fighting over turf. They were fighting over drugs, which was a huge source of funding for them.
Yes.
And we can get to that. But and then, of course, the real proof in the pudding is after the Soviets exit, which they do in quite an orderly way in comparison. That's one big comparison to the U.S. Project later on. They leave a government in place, but it's beset by these disparate warlords, and those are some of the bloodiest years of Afghanistan, is when these guys knowing that they were never really friends or never a coherent national resistance movement. They just start killing each other. They start blowing up Kabul, which is one of the few places, the capital of the country, one of the few places that was untouched by the war, and a very important place, obviously, in Afghanistan as the capital. And then out of them grows the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and all this other stuff. That
with
did not
U.S.
happen in
money.
Vietnam.
I mean, just to hammer that point home, like this was.
Yes.
You can finish your sentence. Sorry, Brendan.
No, absolutely. With U.S. money, with Toyota pickup trucks, we bought them with all the trimmings, and we really didn't care and oppose the Taliban when they showed up either. We were playing footsie with them about pipeline deals, natural gas that could go through Afghanistan, which was always the hope after the Soviet Union fell. So anyway, it was a very different conflict in many important ways than Vietnam. But as you both pointed out, it was a great thing for Americans culturally, politically, to be able to say, now it's their turn to be the imperialists, and we can just spin all of this in reverse and project all of this Vietnam syndrome, so-called, that we've been having only a couple years before the Soviet invasion, and then just place it on Russia and not, examine any of the ways that not only are we not over Vietnam, we're now funding this war that we're claiming is the worst threat to peace.
Yeah, they're just as bad, and they're also incompetent in their battles. And I mean, that just is the fact that was a consideration, even if it's somewhat subconscious, is damning in and of itself. But you mentioned the pipeline element. Again, either of you could take this, but outside of maybe it being, one, a proxy battle, obviously, between the United States and the USSR, and two, a potential ground for a pipeline to pass through. Like, what was the strategic importance of Afghanistan, or was there any resource extraction? Because I think, like, it's a little different than, say, when we're having a conversation about Iraq, where that was quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
A good point of compare. So this is the part where drugs sort of figure in, because to your point, part of what, natural resources may not be part of what initiates a war, but they can absolutely play a role in sustaining it because they provide revenues to the belligerents. And the role, like the natural resource in Afghanistan, because as you point out in your question, or as you're sort of alluding to in your question, Emma, there weren't really many developed industries in the country. There was not the existing agricultural infrastructure in the country had been demolished by the war over the course of the war. So it meant that the only really remaining kind of resource that was left to exploit, and exploit it they did, was opium, which, people can read about how, poppies are easy to grow and very durable. And Afghanistan is right next to Pakistan. And another way to understand this conflict is, then to think about, well, then hold on. If the only thing that they have is the drug money and stuff, and that arose as a consequence primarily of the wars, which is true, then, what is the value there? And that's hard for Americans to see naturally because we don't live there. But for the countries that are all like there, for instance, Russia and the Soviet Union, which are next door, what happens in Afghanistan is important in the way that, what happens in Mexico or Canada is important to Americans. And for the case of Pakistan, especially, I think their influence and their role here explains a lot as well. Because, for example, the opium industry and the, some of the basis for the rise of the Taliban, for instance, were, Pakistani shipping mafia or magnates, if you like. And there's a, real, I think, kind of, those are the sorts of commercial relationships that are the really influential ones, for example, are, I think, in determining the kinds of politics that you're talking about.
But it has to be more submerged. So, I mean, the fact that like the heroin industry was a driving factor here, like, I guess my question is how can that be subtextual when it seems so clear? And then also it's a black market drug, obviously. So, like, what is the direct benefit for capitalists in the United States?
Well, the really amazing thing that tends to happen to make everything look a little too simple sometimes is that right as we sort of walked away from Southeast Asia as the center of the Cold War, in which the CIA, this is a well-known phenomenon, a lot of great books on it. They created the Golden Triangle, the heroin trade in Southeast Asia as a means of funding for all kinds of things, not least the Cold War shenanigans that were always going on. And we simply took that model and brought it into Afghanistan, which of course had the poppies to serve as another drug outpost that would provide illicit funds. And what capitalists got out of it, in a sense, was, there's always this political or geopolitical thing going on, and then there's a direct graft or economic carrot and stick that wars, of course, represent. And it was just one of those more kind of sleazy underbelly aspects. I obviously, no big American company was looking for the next heroin contract in the same way that Exxon was looking for the next contract coming out of Baghdad. But loads of Western officials were paid off throughout the years with heroin money. And I would put it like this as well, that, in Afghanistan, we see the intersection of both the war on terror, of course, but also the war on drugs. And neither war, so-called, is really about abolishing terror,
right,
per se, or abolishing drugs, per se, be it over there or over here. It's about market share. It's about getting rid of people who are not in our club who deal drugs and making space for the people who are in the club who deal drugs. And plenty of our clients, the warlords who came out of the Mujahideen, some of them ended up in the Taliban, some of them ended up on our side in the Karzai government. They were protected. They were kingpins all over the government in Afghanistan that we thought were good guys and deserved their share of the heroin trade, and who were also terrorists and deserved their share of the terrorism racket as well. So you're right. It is a much more. It's not nearly as sort of surface level evil as the war for oil or whatever that happened in Iraq. But Afghanistan was always kind of a means to an end for the British and for the Americans. For the Soviets, it was a government over their border that they thought was cracking up, and quite erroneously thought they could prop up. But the British and the Americans always used it as a means to control the spigot of that region. And as we saw, they didn't stop at Afghanistan in the Bush administration. They went right on to the next war. And I think their plan after that was the real prize, which would be Iran, which of course shares a border with Afghanistan. And with a pliant Afghanistan and a pliant Iraq, there would be the ability to do what the neocons always really dreamed of, but things went so poorly that they didn't get to do it, which was really control Iran eventually.
Yeah, and that makes it so much more clear. And I guess this is a good time to kind of go a little bit, zoom out a little bit and just explain what the Mujahideen was for the audience and what that meant domestically in Afghanistan, what the people of Afghanistan were experiencing during this period, and how obviously that unimaginable trauma, generational trauma and suffering continues to this day.
Sure. So one way of thinking about it is that the Mujahideen, which is just Arabic for warriors, they were essentially like mafia chieftains. And that meant that they were competing for the equivalent of state authority with the state, which is, a pretty, it basically meant that, in the places mostly in the countryside, in the smaller cities that were especially not in Kabul, you had essentially the existing government fighting for basic authority, control over territory with these warlords who were getting pumped full of cash. And the consequence was, just these constant fights over territory that would level, where people lived. Civilians suffered from bombings, both from the air and from the Soviet side, and then also you had, bicycle bombs from the Mujahideen side that they had been given by the CIA. They'd been trained to make by the CIA. There's the what the Afghan experienced, throughout this period, as a basis for the Mujahideen that were fighting to liberate the country, was just the outright destruction of the country. And it's a thing that really intensifies once, because once the Soviet Union is defeated, the Mujahideen transform from, they cease being called the Mujahideen and they become, people now generally refer to them as warlords. And it's, like all that happens is that, well, there's no more state to speak of. So now they are all competing to effectively have that title. And that's, you can sort of track the degree of violence along those lines as the conflict develops over the years.
To get specific and offer a couple individuals who were, well-known commanders and our favorite commanders. And we should also say it wasn't just America funding these guys and training these guys. It was really a State Department. I don't know if it was a CIA or State Department cable or memo. It calls it an axis, which is you may not be on the right side of something if you're calling your own team the Axis, but it was America, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, the Chinese communists actually at the time, because at that point they had made nice with the U.S. and were now considered the Soviets the bigger enemy, and other participants, Israel, South Africa, sometimes. So they were all funding and sort of matching each other's funds for the Mujahideen. But America was by far, it was the superpower. So we were the one that exercised perhaps the most influence along with Pakistan. At any rate, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar is one of our favorite commanders. It was sort of the vision anyone has of a Taliban or an Al-Qaeda, sort of severe features and, brutal attitude toward women and any kind of progressive society that's possible in Afghanistan. He was one of the earliest contacts that we made way back in the 70s. And he was an open criminal and warlord at the time. More sort of a smooth criminal was this guy named Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was sort of built up in the West as the kind of religious Democrat or sort of like progressive fighter, who, if you read the actual CIA guys' accounts, his guys ran as many drugs and executed their strategy with as much sexual violence against their opponents as any other commander in the Mujahideen. Really, really blood-curdling stuff. But you kind of it was like a good cop, bad cop thing. You kind of had to have one guy who looked like, well, he's one of the good ones. He's one of the moderates. I mean, we saw this with Syria, the moderate rebels and all this stuff. It's a good way to kind of like, provide a sheen that gives some illusion to, this being a possible progressive policy in some way. And there were other guys who were kind of just, hucksters, who were, I kind of like respect how they just took what they could from the U.S. trough and said, look, they're sending us, free guns and money. Let's just say we're holy warriors, when in fact they were, as Noah said, mafia dons. And so there's a lot of colorful characters, but guys you would not want controlling the eastern part of your country or the western part of your country or whatever, once there's no law and no state anymore. And that's precisely what happened after the Soviets left.
And I feel like everyone should subscribe to Blowback, so and people are more familiar with the recent history, right? So we don't. I'm so much more interested in just like setting this table for people, because obviously it's super key to know that our involvement in Afghanistan did not just start after 9/11. This is all of the context that leads to this particular point. And before I let you guys go, if you could just re-emphasize the scale of money, of weapons that we poured into Afghanistan that leads directly to, like, we shouldn't have left Afghanistan to save the women, to teach them how to read, is what they said to us when Biden withdrew, which was a very good thing that Biden did. To just shine a light on how disingenuous that is, because of all of that history, the amount of money, the amount that we poured into this project, which was an abject failure and destructive force.
Yeah, I would say that the hypocrisy, of course, about the women's rights. I mean, we're already letting money slide to the Taliban again. We've frozen bank assets, of course, but that goes back as a canard because, when the communist government, for whatever their other flaws in their political practice, they were trying like hell to build schools and to educate women. And we, more than any other force, made sure that would never become a nationwide reality in Afghanistan. And we have a great interview that we sprinkle throughout the season and then have the full thing in the bonus episodes if people subscribe, with an Afghan politician named Malalai Joya, who was the first and youngest woman MP, member of parliament in Afghanistan, who has more right to speak on this kind of thing than anyone else. And she was a lifelong advocate against the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. But the scale of Operation Cyclone, forget what comes later. I mean, it was upwards of 10 to 12 billion, which at the time was, again, not only the largest CIA operation in history, but a lot of money. And
also probably the tip of the iceberg. The nature of covert operations, it should be stressed, is that like you don't ever really know fully about what's below the surface, especially ones that were as tightly held as this was for as many years.
Billions upon billions of dollars that went to everything, not just guns, but school books for children that taught kids how to basically read and write and count in jihadist terminology that we printed in the out of the University of Nebraska, which when the Taliban took over, they happily used. It wasn't just guns and trucks and stuff. It was everything, like every part of their country we tried to shape toward a jihad. And of course that, today there are many such cases, but it was billions of dollars. And it, as one U.S. official put it after 9/11, this is going to change your country forever. Forget us. You could say that about any point of our involvement in Afghanistan's history. We were always affecting the next chapter of their history against their will, in every way possible.
Yeah. Any final thoughts here, Noah, before we let you go?
Just that, first, thanks again for having us on. And that if you want to listen to the whole season all at once right now, so season 4 is available fully right now for $25. You can sign up at blowback.show. Just click the button that said subscribe. It'll bring you there. You can listen on all your favorite podcast apps. The archive, you get all of our episodes from the past for free. And you'll be getting updates and promo codes for upcoming merch, which we are doing for the first time.
Oh, cool.
So, did I miss anything, Brendan? Oh yeah, and the score, because Brendan does all of the music and the sound.
No way.
Yeah. So the third, and we're I guess this will be your third soundtrack release, which comes out on September 25th, and unbelievably, and I wanted to say this and not Brendan, the guy who designed Brendan's album art is also the guy who designed, it has now been revealed, the next Doja Cat album art.
Whoa.
So Brendan James, Doja Cat have the same album art.
And we will both be up for awards at the VMAs this year.
Absolutely.
I mean, I look forward to that.
I'm excited to see Brendan eat on the red carpet.
Well, I mean, you're already kind of a celebrity, Noah, because you were photographed at that Knicks game. Who were you behind?
Edie Falco.
Edie Falco. Look at that. I mean, and you're in Jersey, so like that is a full circle photo op. Gotta say.
I said, hey, I'm from Montclair, and she was like, oh, I've heard of it.
No, I did not know you were from Montclair. You know that I'm from Glen Ridge. Did I tell you that?
Oh, well, there you go.
There you go. Wow.
And I'm also a Bergen County boy.
Bergen County boy over here. We're in the Jets.
Basically in New Jersey. The majority that they're referring to in the majority report is that the majority of you from New Jersey.
Correct. Yes. Sorry, Brendan. I'm not sure.
I feel very othered suddenly.
Yes. I apologize. I'll make it up to you by we'll be putting a link to the sign up for Blowback in the description or wherever you're listening to this. Or watching this, and at majority.fm. Hopefully that smooths some things over with us.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, guys, really appreciate your time today. Lots of positive comments here about Blowback, loving the season. So everyone check it out. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, guys, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Garrison Lovely, who is a McKinsey whistleblower. We are back, and we are just, we are here joined with Garrison Lovely, a freelance journalist, host of the podcast, The Most Interesting People I Know, author of the piece in The Nation about his own experiences with the consulting behemoth, Confessions of a McKinsey Whistleblower. Garrison, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you started working at McKinsey when you were 21, an intern, right? And eventually you started working there full-time. In your piece, you do not hold back about your experience there. How would you describe the role that McKinsey plays, and consulting in general, but McKinsey's definitely the biggest, I think, in the country, right? The role that they play, the function they serve, and why it's so damn problematic.
Yeah, I mean, how you feel about McKinsey is really kind of how you feel about capitalism, because it's hard to point to an organization that's done more to accelerate and codify the most problematic and emblematic things that capitalism does. They are a firm that takes ideas from themselves or from some company and spreads them around to other companies in the industry, takes ideas from industry, takes them to governments, nonprofits, foundations. And the firm has been around for basically 100 years and has just played a role in almost every trend you can imagine, from firm consolidation to privatization of government assets, to executive compensation, to labor being destroyed.
Yeah.
The fingerprints are everywhere if you know where to look, but it's actually quite hard to find them because McKinsey is so secretive about who they work for, what they do. And that secrecy is just coming very, very strong from the top down. People working there are just not supposed to talk about clients with their romantic partners, with their friends, with the public. And so this is like quite an unusual thing to be putting out in the world.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I did not know how secretive they are about who they're doing the consulting work for. Like, I know some people, not closely, but just through friends who work in consulting, and they travel. All I know is they travel a ton, and they make an insane amount of money for like people. I'm people that graduated the same year as me in college, and I'm 29 years old, and that's very much your experience based on what I read in the piece, right? Where like lots of drinking, lots of money, but lots of really grimy and soul crushing work.
Yeah, Monday through Thursday, you expect to be at the client site, which might be in a nice city, it might be in the middle of nowhere, it might be in a country on the other side of the world, and you'll stay at a nice hotel. All of your meals will be expensed. You basically incur no personal financial costs while you're working. Monday through Thursday. Friday, you're back in the office, and the starting salary when I was there was like $80,000 out of school, which is good, obviously, but not like the top. But as you stay, 2 years in, 3 years in, you could be making $250,000. If you make partner, which you can do by 30, you can make close to $1 million a year. And the opportunities once you leave can be even more lucrative working in private equity or other finance.
I mean, private equity seems like a kind of analogous industry in the way that like it's also super emblematic of capitalism's problems. We can touch on that another day, I guess, because you open your piece with a story about Rikers and Khalif Browder, who people may know on the show had been held for Rikers for years. He was in solitary confinement over stealing something small when he was 16 years old, and he hadn't even had a trial yet, but he was held there because that's how our insane jailing system works, and he died by suicide. You started at McKinsey around the time of Browder's death, and people may be asking, why is this relevant? Why does this giant corporate consulting company have anything to do with a New York City jail? But you were working for Rikers in this. That was one of the clients.
Yeah, and the fact that McKinsey was doing a project for Rikers, New York City Department of Corrections, was actually one of the reasons I decided to work there over a financial firm or a tech firm, which were also, interested in employing me. And the goal was actually to reduce violence in Rikers. This was coming from the mayor's office, and McKinsey was trying out its first foray in corrections work. And I was just intrigued by this because I'd been working in prison reform at my university, and I'd been a prison educator through the Cornell Prison Education Program. And the idea was like I could go in and actually be reforming a prison or jail at 21 years old. But while we were there, we were just taking on the culture and perspective of the oppressor class, essentially, within Rikers. And even though the goal was good, we were just so constrained in what we could even look at. For example, cash bail at the time, if you had eliminated it, which is holding people pre-trial simply because they can't afford to pay, not because they're a flight risk or a danger to society. If you had eliminated that, you'd have half as many people in Rikers at the same time that we were there. But McKinsey, by its nature, is never going to recommend that kind of policy change. And one of the refrains you hear at the firm is that we do execution, we don't do policy. And so we just ended up looking at Rikers with the same kind of toolkit that the people running the jail had. And we ended up taking on a lot of the brutality and the mentality of the people working there. And we never once, to my knowledge, interviewed anybody who was incarcerated at Rikers. We were only talking to the people who were the guards and the administrators.
And then, once you started working there full time, you had done work on like incarceration. So then you started working on an ICE contract. And this is really, I think, where you start to see how scary the contracting out of like this kind of work can be.
Yeah. With Rikers, the goal was at least a good one. I think reducing violence in a facility is I think a good goal to have.
Yeah.
With ICE, it was an organizational transformation, which is jargon for just like coming in and trying to change the entire culture of the organization to make it more effective at achieving its mission. And I came in initially looking at talent management, so like basically HR, trying to assess the organizational health of ICE. This is all very like jargony, but basically surveying people about their jobs, seeing what could be improved. And this would like in some indirect way make them more effective at their mission, which I didn't know very much about at the time. When I started, Obama was still the president. I sort of bought this myth that he was like a pretty competent liberal technocrat. And I didn't know what ICE really did. I had very little time to decide on whether to do the project. And I wanted to be a good team player. I wanted to learn how the federal government worked. I figured whoever did the job instead of me might just be worse. And then when I was there, Trump became president soon after. And unsurprisingly, he changed the direction of the organization. He changed the remit from focusing on deporting people with relatively severe criminal records to focusing on literally everybody who was here without documentation. He also directed the agency to expand its workforce, basically tripling the amount of deportation officers. And I was tasked with modeling out how to do those hires. And I just became extremely depressed and concerned with the work that we were doing. I looked more into what ICE was doing, and people on my team were also pretty concerned overall. And there were a lot of people on the team who marched in the Women's March and were anti-Trump, yet here we were implementing the centerpiece of what was a white nationalist agenda.
Yeah, and I mean, and let's be clear, like, you towards the end of your piece, you're getting arrested for civil disobedience, protesting ICE. So this was a radicalizing moment for you. And I mean, like, one thing that struck me is that you had a coworker suggesting sabotage in your work with ICE. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, this was actually a partner. So somebody pretty senior at McKinsey, and I like this person. I'd worked with them before. And I was just talking about the work at ICE, and they were like, "Oh, could you sabotage it from within?" I'm like, "Ha ha ha!" And he's like, "No, but really." And it kind of speaks to both the sentiment of many people at McKinsey, which was very anti this work, and then also the powerlessness of even a partner at the firm to do anything to really oppose this, because McKinsey is run as a partnership. It's the largest partnership in the world, and this means that the partners really have more or less free reign of what kind of work they take on. There have been some reforms since then to change that a bit, and like risk management and risk evaluations for new clients. But especially at that time, there was just like nothing that could really be done. And it only takes a few people to decide, what, this work is worth doing. And that could look like, turbocharging sales of opioids to people who are addicted to them, which McKinsey was part of. And this could look like helping ICE deport more people and reduce costs for various essential services, which McKinsey also did.
Yeah, it's the partner sounds like, you know, a nice person, but part of the issue is like the money and the flood of money that happens that comes at you at such a young age. Like you saying that you could be a partner by the time you're 30 is striking to me. That seems very designed at getting young professionals targeted, as you say in your piece, from elite universities to come in, to make these connections, to work in a variety of different sectors. And then when they go on to do something else, like say Pete Buttigieg, for example, you have all of your fingerprints in and like connections with these, whether it be, a corporation, or whether you're fixing bread prices, or whether you're working with ICE, like you have basically taking capitalism 101 and now you are kind of in the club. Is that an accurate reading of the way that like the structure is set up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously the people who choose to work at McKinsey are going to be more predisposed to be pro-market than like maybe the typical Harvard undergrad or something. But I think you can come in without too much of a sense of politics or strong views on economic systems or economic policy. And then once you're there, you're just surrounded by like very smart people who have consciously chosen to participate in capitalism and have benefited from it enormously, and maybe have some justification for what they're doing, might argue in favor of like efficient market hypothesis or various other ideas. And then over time, you just take on the worldview of capitalist ideologue, more or less. And McKinsey's reports will say like, we are long on capitalism. Like we believe that like yada, 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 it's good for the world, that it can solve the climate crisis. And this just becomes like part of your worldview. And so say you work there for 2 years at 22, and you're impressionable and maybe not super well informed on politics, you go on eventually to work for a foundation or in government to run for office or whatever, and you still have that mentality. And like Pete Buttigieg, his dad, I believe, is like a radical academic, and he worked at McKinsey, and like you can see that the mindset of the McKinsey mindset. There's a book literally called this, of somebody who has what I call technocratic utopian worldview, where you just think that if you let loose the best and the brightest at the various problems of the world, one by one, they will fall away under careful analysis and just smart thinking. And efficiency. And I just don't think this works. Yeah, efficiency. Efficiency is huge.
That's the thing I need to I need to pick your brain on, because, like, you know, when the East Palestine rail derailment happened, a lot of light was shown on the fact that many of these corporate behemoths, even when they're dealing with like transporting dangerous, hazardous chemicals, they cut their labor force to such a lean, like marginal amount, right? In order to increase their margins. And it seems like labor and job scarcity in certain ways, in a way, like corporations like to call themselves job creators, but in reality, then they'll hire McKinsey to come in and say, like, this is the bare minimum labor force that you need in order to maximize profits and bonuses for CEOs.
Right.
If you could talk about that being such a central plank of what McKinsey does in its efficiency work.
Yeah, I mean, the term you'll often hear is called right sizing. And there are a bunch of different euphemisms for essentially cutting
That's so
labor.
stupid. That's so stupid. This corporate speak is just hilarious to me, but continue. Okay.
Yeah. No, there's a bunch of this. There's like zero basis budgeting, like all these ideas to be like, there is some optimal amount of people working on something, optimal amount to spend on various cost functions for the organization to maximize the organization's goals, which in the vast majority of McKinsey's cases is just profitability. And, you know, if you're looking at short-term profitability or quarterly returns or whatever, maybe that's actually true. Maybe that like diminishing workforces or doing like just-in-time supply chain management is the best for delivering that kind of profitability. But then it may not be robust to a disaster such as COVID. It may increase risks in ways that are hard to appreciate over short timescales. And I think this just ruthlessly prioritizing of profit just has all these consequences that are just really hard to predict. And I don't know what McKinsey's role was in recommending like supply chain management of the sort that might have contributed to the East Palestine incident. But the idea of like getting things, like doing the bare minimum more or less to get things to where they need to be at some set time, I would not be surprised at all if McKinsey's fingerprints were on that as well.
Yeah, or or any consultancy, right? That
Sure.
comes in, and but as you say, they don't leave much of a trail, and they try to keep their client list very secretive, that should be disclosed, I think, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy because McKinsey for a while, early on in its history, was thinking about working for competitors. So you work for Procter & Gamble and then also Johnson & Johnson, who are making products to compete with each other. And there was a decision around like, should we do this? This seems unethical. It seems like it could lead to bad incentives, etc. And I think Bain, a competitor to McKinsey, just chose to only work for one client in a given industry. McKinsey said, no, we're going to do it all, and we're just going to have firewalls in place and all this stuff. McKinsey got in trouble for working for the FDA and the clients that the FDA regulates. The federal government got mad at them for this for pretty obvious reasons. There's a clear conflict of interest. But given that McKinsey's client list is so secret, it's really hard to even say, hey, you're working for these two people that should be, their interests are at odds with each other. And, if you look at the number of clients that McKinsey serves and the percentage of the Fortune 500 that it serves, it's statistically impossible for them not to be serving different competitors. And maybe they're anonymizing things as best practices, and maybe people aren't supposed to work directly for competitors within some period of time. But by and large, it's just creating. You can't they're just trusting them.
Double dip, triple dip, quadruple dip, right? So they can make as much money as humanly possible. Another politician connected to a consultancy that you just mentioned, Bain, obviously Mitt Romney, right? We've had the CEO of Bain in the 80s. So this is just the way that these tentacles spread. I guess lastly here, a lot of your work was focused on, like Rikers and ICE. These are government entities. And can you talk about the perils of that efficiency mindset, the lean kind of models, and the for-profit models that McKinsey? Actually, I'm sorry, I have two more questions.
Sure.
That McKinsey employs, and how that is bad, really, for like how government functions.
Yeah. One quick thing on Mitt Romney. So he worked for Bain, the consulting firm, and then when he was running for president, he said if he won, he'd bring McKinsey in, which just kind of speaks to McKinsey's reputation above all else. Like, they're basically the same firm, but he was loyal to not his actual original place. But yeah, I think an interesting story here is like McKinsey consulted for NASA and the government as it set up NASA in response to Sputnik. And they were very firm advocates for privatizing and contracting out an enormous amount of the work. And I think something like 90% of that work was contracted out. And they kind of set up the contractor state that supports the federal government. And then come Obamacare implementation, McKinsey actually wrote a report saying because of an over-reliance on contractors and a lack of internal testing and basically competence in developing something like this rollout is at risk of failing. And it did fail. And I think this is just such a perfect story of like, you are, reaping what you sow. And I think that having work done by contractors, I mean, it's much more expensive. You are paying private sector salaries to do government jobs. And like, I think that ultimately government jobs should be paid better. So you get more talented people working on those things. And I think that for things that the government does reliably year in and year out, that work should be done in-house. It shouldn't be just permanently contracted out to McKinsey teams that make millions of dollars in a month, possibly. And another example of like the McKinsey mindset is at the BBC. They consulted for them, and they're so pro-market that they said, hey, to allocate internal resources like studio space, you should have a market where different departments have a budget and they buy and like compete and bid for space. And this was a disaster. It just created like massive amounts of inefficiency and layers of bureaucracy to allocate scarce resources that everybody needed. And this kind of just like the market will solve everything mindset just is so pervasive within the firm that they're bringing it to places that don't need it.
Yeah, and lastly here, what does consulting allow a corporation to do that they couldn't do in-house? Because on paper, right, you would be like, why would I pay millions of dollars to a consultancy when I could just like fire a bunch of people myself, or I could have the money people at I don't know, like these major corporations that are doing work for them. They have all these kinds of money people, right, in house to some degree. But is it this sense of plausible deniability when the consultancy comes in, like, well, McKinsey recommended it, so we gotta lay off 20% of the workforce?
Yeah, there are a ton of reasons, and one of them is definitely what you just mentioned, which is like this plausible deniability. A CEO might have a certain idea, like, oh, I want to do X or Y, like lay off 20% of the workforce. So they hire McKinsey with like some kind of mission for the project, which is like evaluate what percentage of the workforce makes sense for us as a company. What's the right size for us? And then McKinsey does a bunch of analysis and they back it up with spreadsheets and models and they make a fancy slide deck and they present it. And then the CEO can be like, well, McKinsey's really good. They're really smart. They did all this great work. Seems like we should just listen to them. And so it provides a justification for, kind of the answer that you were already looking for. Another thing is that there's, specialties, expertise, whatever that McKinsey can bring to the table. There are genuine experts on various, obscure industries or sub-industries that you can bring in. But I think a big thing is that McKinsey and other consulting firms have not quite a monopoly, but they have just access to extremely smart people who are going to work really, really hard. And so you can rent brains. You can just have a bunch of people that you could never really afford to hire on your own come in and do some big piece of work at a blistering pace, and maybe something that you as a company, even like a Fortune 500 company, just like would never have the ability to do yourself, because these firms have just like managed to monopolize such a large portion of the talent pool. And there's also just a certain like excitement and prestige that comes with it. My dad worked in the corporate world, and like the way he spoke about McKinsey had this kind of like rarefied quality. And there's a opening to the book The Firm by Duff McDonald, where Duff is interviewing the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, and Jamie Dimon is dismissive of consultants. He's like, oh, but not McKinsey. Those guys are different. And so if you want to be around these people that like maybe you were a little bit insecure about, or maybe they were the best students at the business school you went to, you can hire them, have them work for you, and there's a certain like, ooh, I've got like the best and the brightest working on my behalf, and they have to listen to what I say, and they're going to do what I want them to do. And I think that social component is not really discussed very much.
Well, thank you so much for writing this. It's a great window into McKinsey and which is people may not realize, but making many decisions that affect our lives daily. Garrison Lovely, journalist, host of the podcast The Most Interesting People I Know, and the piece is called Confessions of a McKinsey Whistleblower in the Nation. Garrison, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Emma.
All right, guys, with that, we're going to wrap up the free hour of this program and head into the fun half, where we will be joined by Brandon Sutton and Matt Binder. Let's bring those guys in. As I tell you, you better be tuning in. I don't know why as I tell you, you better be, a little Jersey accent slipped out. Don't love that. Better be tuning in today. ESPN mega episodes, Super Bowl picks, playoff picks, week 1 against the spread. We're starting Survivor Pool, Bradley and I, because we just can't get enough of it. We're doing Survivor this year as well. All that stuff, and we'll be making fun of Jonathan Gannon. YouTube.com/ESPN show today. Tune in at 4 p.m. And Left Reckoning, I am not sure what happened on Left Reckoning. If you're bringing them in, Bradley, I can find it. Okay, they're ready? Yeah. All right, so Bradley's looking up what happened on Left Reckoning, but check it out as well. And here we go. Matt Binder, Brandon Sutton. What's up, my friends?
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing well. What is happening over on Doom, Scam Economy, and Leftist Mafia, the trifecta?
Sure. So Leftist Mafia tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time at youtube.com/MattBinder. And also you can check out the latest episode of Doomed at youtube.com/MattBinder and at doomedcast.com. I had on Jason Campbell of Media Matters, and we basically talked about the year of decline for one Steven Crowder, how basically 2023 has not been a good year for Crowder, everything going wrong from him, from his home life to his business dealings with other conservatives to his views from moving from YouTube to Rumble. So check that out.
Definitely do so. Brandon, what's happening over on the discourse?
I don't have anything for anyone this week because I am taking my mom on a vacation.
Well.
I know, right?
Yeah. I think people will forgive you for that then.
Well, it's all the other ones they won't forgive me for. That's the problem. But this week I have a good excuse. I'm being a mediocre son.
Good son for sure. All right, guys.
No, Good Son is the movie with Macaulay Culkin, I think.
It is?
Gosh. No, maybe.
I have no idea.
No, I can't remember what kid is in that. It might be L. Culkin.
Well, I think I must have triggered some sort of core memory for you, but Left Reckoning, we got an update here, Bradley?
Yeah. So on Tuesday, they David and Matt discussed the Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, his impeachment hearing that's now underway, and then they also spoke with Robert Scarla to talk about tech surveillance and more about that, who it's targeting, what they need to know to fight it. YouTube.com/Left Reckoning for more there, and Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to access the post game.
All right. The number is 646-257. Wait. Start over. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back, back.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
Pussy.
Back.
We are back. We are back, and we are in the phones, and then we are opening up the phone lines. They are off now. Gonna read some IMs, and then we're gonna do some clips. Floyd the Barber says Brandon was right. The Good Son came out in 1992. It starred Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood.
Wow.
Brandon?
I thought it was 1993, but yeah.
Damn. I mean, I guess, your movie trivia skills down the
You
toilet.
messed up, man. Yeah, you messed up big time.
Constantly.
What a disappointment.
That's what they
We're
tell me.
disappointed in you. Space Case. The same situation McKinsey caused at the BBC happened at Sears also. I wonder where Sears got the idea. Whoa, interesting. Yes, exactly. These are a lot of nice positive comments about the Blowback podcast. I agree. Gay Obama says a correction/update on yesterday's show. Joe Rogan is a co-founder of Onnit Labs Incorporated and sold the company to Unilever in 2021, 1 year after Onnit Labs got their $2.3 million PPP loan approved on April 9th, 2020. Good. Okay, we went back and forth. Matt said that, then Sam issued a correction, and now Matt didn't even need to, we didn't even need to issue the correction, maybe. Thank you for the correction to the correction. There you go.
Onnit Labs?
Yeah,
I'm out of the loop here.
They got a PPP loan. We played some clip of Rogan, with the rich man north of Richmond guy saying, this millionaire is